Hello and good morning, Annie Jacobsen. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm great today. How are you doing?
Absolutely fantastic. So mellow, and yet your book is so explosive. I mean, wow. Where did you pull that energy from?
You know, I'm an investigative journalist. I've written, before nuclear war, a scenario, I wrote 6 previous books about the CIA and the Pentagon. Very little surprises me. But I must say, this book was shocking.
I bet.
To report.
I was shocked when I read about it, and I was even more shocked when I stepped inside of it, because we are at a breaking point where something could really go wrong, and we need to be educated as to how serious this really is.
It's precisely why I wrote the book. I wanted to show readers in appalling detail just how horrific a nuclear war would be. The idea that we are at the brink is absolutely correct. The UN Secretary General recently said we're one miscalculation, one misunderstanding away from nuclear annihilation. That's a direct quote.
You know, one of the things that you scared me with right away inside this book was the fact that you were very transparent when you said that it doesn't matter where you are in this country, there's a bomb pointed directly at you. And that woke me up in a way that it gave me those childhood fears that I had up in Montana with those Minuteman missiles.
Well, it should frighten you. I mean, the whole idea of nuclear war, that nuclear war will not happen, rather, is predicated on this psychological phenomena called deterrence. And this is what the Defense Department lives by. Deterrence is just another word for prevention. So we all live under the threat that nuclear war will never happen because we have all these nuclear weapons pointed at our adversaries with nuclear weapons, and they have them pointed at us, and therefore this is just going to hold. But to my eye, the real question is, what if it doesn't hold? And that's the question I took to my sources, former secretaries of defense, former nuclear subforce commander. I mean, you saw the list of interviews I did. And I asked them, and I discussed with them what would happen. And the result is nuclear war, a scenario.
You know, I'm still not over Oppenheimer. I really am not over that movie. I don't think I'll ever get over that movie. And then this adds to it in the way that I'm going to be a bit better educated American because you're sharing with us some amazing stuff.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because I have that same feeling, but here's the upside of that. Los Alamos, the laboratory, which, of course, a lot of the movie Oppenheimer takes place at, they have been very, very notoriously distant from journalists. All of my various books have touched upon nuclear weapons. I'm constantly at their, asking them for FOIA requests. I've gone to their library multiple times. But reporting this book was the first time that they actually were forthcoming with information. They even declassified for the book documents about the origin story of the president's nuclear football. That's what he carries around, his military aide carries around. And they did this. I asked them why. Why the sudden transparency? They told me the Oppenheimer effect. Ooh. Not the man, but the movie.
Ooh, see, chills. I mean, the thing about Hollywood is that they're jumping on this story, but they're doing it, 200 or 300 years later, people are still underneath the ground. As somebody who has done the investigating, how does that make you feel, knowing that they are making stories, these sci-fi stories, about something that we know nothing about?
Well, I'm all for public awareness, and I'm also uniquely aware of how impactful, modern movies and modern television shows about war are on warfighters, because I've interviewed hundreds of them and they have told me. And so I really think that being, learned about things, we don't have to say educated because it sounds so boring, like we're being lectured to, but just like learning things, understanding things, being curious. It's why I've done so many podcasts for this book tour, because people get curious and then they lean into the issue, and then it becomes a talking point, not among POTUS, President of the United States. Let's face it, the presidents are completely leaving nuclear weapons out of any of their discussions. And I think people are beginning to wake up to the fact that, wait a minute. President has sole presidential authority. To launch a nuclear war, the president asks permission of no one, not his SecDef, not the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, not the Congress. So why don't we as a people care more about a president and what he thinks about nuclear war?
it's very scary to think that this one person has that decision to make. But there's got to be a lot of conversations before, sending out that information.
Well, that's a scary conversation, but even more alarming, as I wrote and you read, there are various protocols and policies in place. And because nuclear war, if it happens, is a sequence of events. That is why the book is written in a ticking time clock scenario. It happens in seconds and minutes, not in hours and weeks. The book that I write happens in 3 acts. In 72 minutes, it's over. Now, people may say, wow, that's like a wildly accelerated scenario. Well, let me give you a quote from former STRATCOM commander, General Keeler. The STRATCOM commander is in charge of the nuclear arsenal. It is he who speaks for the president to take the launch order. Keeler told me when we were discussing a nuclear exchange between Russia and the United States, he said, Annie, the world could end in the next few hours.
Wow. Well, and you know what? One of the things that you've been very truthful with is that you've exposed to our hearts in our reading experiences that there have been 6 times that we have come very close to this. I mean, I always knew of the 11 days of October. I didn't know about the others.
And they are really shocking. And I really work hard to get firsthand witnesses. So in one of the stories that you're referring to, I interviewed another former Secretary of Defense, Bill Perry, who was there for one of those false alarms. He was the person who was going to have to tell the president to launch a counterstrike because there was erroneous reporting of thousands of Russian nuclear weapons coming at the United States. You know what it turned out to be?
I'm waiting.
I'll tell you. Okay. It turned out, it's not funny. It's not funny. That's like a dramatic pause that Bill Perry, had anxiety in his voice after all these decades. It was a training tape.
What?
Meant to simulate nuclear war that had been put into the system in the bunker beneath the Pentagon and also was showing in the bunker beneath STRATCOM, the bunker in Nebraska, the nuclear bunker there. And so both of these command and control centers were seeing the same thing, which looked like a nuclear launch. Bill Perry said it looked real because it was meant to look real.
Wow. See, it's stuff like this that adds the fright to my day, only because I am so afraid of somebody who could get their hands on a dirty bomb. And it has nothing to do with national leaders, but it has to do with terrorism.
Well, there are lots of perils at hand, but shall I tell you the one positive, sort of hopeful moment in all of this reporting that I did?
Give me some hope.
Okay, because it is important. So when I was in high school, I'm dating myself here, in 1983, there was a television movie on ABC called The Day After.
The Day After, yeah.
And it was The Day After, and it was a fictional account of war between Russia and the United States. And it was horrifying, and 100 million Americans watched it. But one very important American watched it, and that was President Ronald Reagan.
Yep.
Before watching that film, Reagan was a nuclear hawk. He believed in more weapons, more nuclear weapons to keep America more safe. That was his premise. And after he watched it, here's the hopeful part, he experienced what is now known as the Reagan reversal. He changed his mind. He wrote in his White House journal, he became greatly depressed. He reached out to the enemy, Russia, and he and Gorbachev started having conversations. They had a Reykjavik summit, and the world went, because of that communication between those two world leaders, the world went from 70,000 nuclear weapons to the approximately 12,500 we have today.
Wow. That movie sits still in my heart, and the reason being is because the fourth city that they say that has been hit, Charlotte, North Carolina, which I moved to in 1985. To this day, I have never forgotten that movie.
That's fascinating, and you began the conversation with your fear that you realized, oh my God, there's a nuclear weapon pointed at me wherever.
All the time, I believe that, all the time, and that's why I think I'm so glued to this book, because this book is speaking something that nobody else wants to talk about. But damn if you don't, Annie.
But what's shocking to me is that you say nobody else wants to talk about, and that is probably true in terms of the average, those of us who just are living our lives. But during COVID is when I was doing most of the major reporting on this book. And that's when everybody, air quotes, former high-ranking presidential advisors had a little more time on their hands and perhaps a little more time to think about big existential questions. And that's when they began talking to me. I did countless Zooms with these presidential advisors, cabinet-level people, all talking about how dangerous this threat is. And now think about where the world is just a few years later. We're having nuclear saber rattling like we haven't heard since, you mentioned, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Wow. 10 minutes with you is not enough. You've got to come back to this show anytime in the future. I love where your heart is. I love your confidence. I love the way that you are willing to step into that story and get us some truth.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
You too.